Most people think the first $100,000 is just a savings goal. I never saw it that way. I saw it as the first machine, a machine that, if built correctly, can eventually begin doing work that your paycheck used to do alone, a machine that can quietly grow while you sleep, while you work, while you make mistakes, while you get older, and while life keeps trying to distract you. A machine that can one day buy back your freedom in ways that income by itself never can. That is why the first 100,000 matters so much. Not because it is a pretty number, not because it sounds impressive, not because you can tell people you made it, because before the first 100,000 progress often feels heavy. After it, capital can finally start helping in a serious way. Most people never understand that distinction. They imagine the first 100,000 as a pile of money to protect. I understand the instinct. If someone works for years, saves painfully, finally reaches a six-figure balance, and then stares at it with fear, that is human. They think, what if I lose it? They think, I cannot make a mistake now. They think, maybe I should just leave it where it is and not touch anything. That instinct sounds prudent. It often is not. Money that sits still for too long is not safe. It is simply shrinking quietly. Inflation does not need drama to hurt you. It needs time. If your money earns nothing while prices rise year after year, then your balance may look stable on a screen, while your real purchasing power declines behind the curtain. The number flatters you, reality does not. That is why I have never believed that the purpose of money is mere storage. The purpose of capital is deployment. Every dollar should eventually be asked a blunt question. What are you doing for me? Are you hiding? Are you shrinking? Are you waiting? Are you being eaten by inflation? Or are you working inside a structure that is compounding and becoming more useful with? That is the right question. And once you ask that question seriously, the whole conversation changes. Now let me say something that many people do not like hearing. The first 100,000 is not mainly hard because income is low. Low income can absolutely make things harder. I will never deny arithmetic. But the deeper reason the first 100,000 is hard is that most people do not have a system. They tell themselves the next raise will fix it. They tell themselves the next promotion will create breathing room. They tell themselves the future version of them will save once life gets calmer. Life rarely gets calmer. Money enters, life expands, bills multiply, expectations rise, a nicer apartment appears, a nicer car appears, a little more travel, a little more convenience, a little more quiet self-reward because I work hard. Then the person looks around and realizes they are making more than ever and somehow still do not feel free. I have seen this many times. A person earning $200,000 can feel just as financially trapped as a person earning far less if every dollar is already assigned to lifestyle. Debt, fixed costs, and image before it has any chance to become capital. This is why earning more is helpful but never sufficient. Wealth is not created by income alone. It is created when income enters a machine. Without the machine, more money just exits through a larger number of doors. That is the first truth. The second truth is that speed matters most in one place: debt. People are always looking for exciting financial insights. Here is one of the least exciting and most important. High-interest debt is a compounding machine working against you. If you are paying 25% on a credit card while dreaming about 7 or 8% long-term investment returns, you are trying to climb a mountain while dragging a chain. You can still move. You will move badly. This is why if I were starting again from zero and trying to reach the first 100,000, I would deal with my high-interest debt fast. Not because debt is morally shameful. I have no interest in moral theater. Because debt that expensive destroys momentum. It steals future options. It drains cash flow that should be building the machine. And worst of all, it fogs the mind. People in debt often feel permanently tense. That tension leaks into every other money decision. It makes them avoid statements, avoid planning, avoid truth, avoid structure. So the first thing I would do is get honest. What do I owe at what rate to whom? What is the minimum? How long would this take if I keep pretending nothing has to change? What is the total price of this if I keep sleepwalking? Most people cannot answer those questions. That is exactly why they stay stuck. Vagueness is expensive. Once the debts are written down clearly, the problem becomes operational instead of mystical. Now it has shape. Now it can be attacked. Now the fear has dimensions. That matters. I have always believed that one of the great hidden benefits of financial organization is psychological. The minute the chaos is named, the pressure inside the mind starts changing. The situation may still be serious, but it is no longer formless. That is what adults do with money. They turn fog into numbers, then they move. Now after debt, people assume the next step is extreme sacrifice. Not in my world. I do not believe in living like a monk, unless that is your temperament. I do not think the path to wealth is paved with miserable little tricks and cheap performances of self-denial. I am not going to tell you to reuse paper towels 3 times and then congratulate yourself for financial genius. I do not want your life to get smaller while your spreadsheet looks cleaner. I want your life to get richer, but rich does not mean careless. It means precise. Spend extravagantly on what you love. Cut mercilessly on what you do not. That line sounds simple. Very few people live it honestly. People tell themselves they love everything. They do not. They simply do not want to face trade-offs. Trade-offs are maybe you genuinely love travel. Good, spend there. Maybe you love a beautiful hotel. Good, spend there. Maybe you love eating well, buying time, children's activities, quality clothing, great books, or a clean, peaceful home. Fine. Spend there. But do not then tell me you equally love the 10 little leaks draining your future. You do not love random convenience spending. You do not love subscriptions you forgot about. You do not love quietly financing an identity. You do not love paying for drift. You tolerate it because it is easy. That is different. The people who reach the first 100,000 are often not the most frugal in some theatrical sense. They are the most honest about what matters and what does not. Once that honesty exists, spending becomes easier to control because control no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like authorship. Authorship with money is everything. The person who has no authorship always feels vaguely behind. The person who starts telling money where to go begins to feel stronger, even before the numbers become impressive. Now let us come back to income. Yes, I want you to earn more, but I do not want you to merely wish for more income. I want you to build the skill of earning more. That is a different standard. A raise negotiated intelligently is a skill. A better role earned through competence is a skill. A side income built on an actual market need is a skill. Selling, writing, managing, negotiating, presenting, problem solving, building trust, creating value, all of that is skill. I trust skill because skill is repeatable. A lucky month can disappear. A skill can be used again. So yes, I would absolutely try to earn more if I were rebuilding from nothing. But every extra dollar would immediately enter a plan. It would not be left standing alone to be pulled into a bigger lifestyle. That is the key. More income without a machine just feeds a bigger appetite. More income inside a machine speeds up freedom. This is why automation is so powerful. Most people overestimate willpower and underestimate environment. They tell themselves they will save whatever is left at the end of the month. That is fantasy. Life is very good at making sure nothing is left over if you let the month make the decisions for you. I prefer to decide in advance. Income comes in, savings and investing happen automatically. Bills are paid, the remaining money is available for guilt. Free spending. That phrase matters. Guilt, Free spending. I do not want you to feel guilty every time you buy dinner or take a trip or enjoy something beautiful. I want you to know the future was already paid first. Once that is true, the present becomes much easier to enjoy. Honestly, automation does this better than intention. Intention is fragile. Automation is mechanical. Mechanical wins. If I would automate from the beginning, even if the amounts were small. Small automatic flows become large with time. Large heroic promises usually become nothing. This is why I love tiny percentage increases that repeat. Take the 1% December increase. Most people ignore something like that because it sounds too small. They do not understand what time does to small increases. If you are investing 10% of your income and raise it to 11%, you may barely feel it. Raise it again the next year, and again, and again. Meanwhile, your income rises, the contribution base rises, the compounding engine gets more fuel. And what looked like a tiny discipline becomes a very large difference years later. That is how real wealth is built. Not by one dramatic leap, by repeated, almost boring improvements that the impatient mind dismisses too early. The impatient mind is the enemy of the first 100,000. The patient mind builds machines. Now, I also want a moat. I always want a moat. A person building wealth without an emergency fund is trying to construct a future while standing on unstable ground. One bad event, and they are back in debt, back in panic, back in reaction. Life is not predictable enough for that. Cars break, bodies break, jobs disappear, relationships end, parents need help. Children cost more than planned, houses leak. Bad news does not wait for your portfolio to be ready. This is why the emergency fund exists. Not for maximum return, for resilience. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses is a sensible starting moat. Sometimes more is appropriate. Sometimes a person can only begin smaller. Fine. What matters is the principle. I do not want every surprise to force me to interrupt the compounding machine or re-enter expensive debt. The emergency fund is not glamorous. It is foundational. The same is true of simple investing. I am not impressed by complexity for its own sake. Most people do not need a portfolio that entertains them. They need one that survives them. Broad low, cost index funds, target date funds, automatic investing, a structure that can keep moving even when the owner is busy, imperfect, distracted, or temporarily emotional. This is not unsophisticated. This is wise. The world is full of investors who confuse complexity with intelligence. They want more parts, more opinions, more customization, more chances to interfere. Very often, all they are doing is creating more points of failure. I would rather own a strong, simple machine than a fascinating, fragile one. That is how I think about wealth. And I think the same way about fees. People ignore fees because they often look small. Over time, they are not small. A percentage point sounds innocent. Over decades, on a growing base, it can quietly absorb a shocking amount of what should have remained yours. Human beings are funny around money. They obsess over tiny visible costs and casually ignore enormous structural ones. That is backward. The big wins in wealth are rarely in the cute little savings tricks. They are in the architecture, debt, savings rate, investment consistency, tax awareness, fees, housing, transportation, the decisions that repeat. That is where the first 100,000 is won or lost. Now let me say something that should be obvious but somehow is not. Do not take money advice from people whose financial lives you would never want to copy. Reality matters if a person has no savings, no investments, no system, no evidence of long-term wealth building, and no relationship to money that produces calm. Why would I let their opinion shape my strategy? I would not. The people around you normalize something that matters more than most admit. If they normalize overspending, excuses, drift, and chaos, you will have to fight harder for structure. If they normalize investing, planning, and long-term thinking, the fight becomes easier. This is why examples matter, communities matter, hearing sane voices matters. You do not need perfection. You need proof that another way is possible. Now, let me warn you about the traps that destroy the first 100,000 more often than most people expect. The first is the get-rich, quick trap, fast money stories, meme assets. No, sleep hustle theater, the cult of excitement, the belief that real wealth must come from something dramatic, secret, or extreme. Most of it is nonsense. Real wealth is usually built more quietly than the internet can sell. That does not mean it is painfully slow. It means it is real. Real things have process. Real things have repetition. Real things have boring stretches where nothing seems cinematic enough to share. I trust boring more than hype. The second trap is toxic frugality. I do not want a rich life later built on a starved life now. I do not think misery is a badge of honor. I do not think suffering for its own sake is evidence of virtue. Money should expand life, not shrink the soul. Yes, cut ruthlessly where you do not care. Yes, build discipline. But do not turn your life into a performance of deprivation and call it wisdom. The third trap is, I missed my chance. Maybe you should have started earlier. Fine, you did not. Now what? Are you going to waste the next 10 years repeating the same regret until it becomes a second mistake? That is insanity. The best time was earlier. The next best time is now. Stop donating years to regret. The fourth trap is endless optimization. This one catches a particular kind of person. They want to feel smart, so they optimize everything, every yield, every tiny rate difference, every app, every hack, every microscopic edge. Meanwhile, the real system remains weak. That is not mastery. It is distraction with better vocabulary. A person with a good machine who leaves it alone will often beat the person who spends years perfecting tiny details, because the optimizer is too stimulated by tweaking to let compounding do its job. That is another reason the first 100,000 is hard. It requires not only discipline, but also the ability to stop touching what works. That is harder than people admit. In truth, building the first 100,000 is not just about saving a number. It is about becoming the kind of person who can build and respect a machine of conscious spending, a machine of rising, a machine of automatic investing, a machine of protection, a machine of patience, a machine that keeps running even when life becomes noisy. That is what the first 100,000 really represents. Not just money structure, and once structure exists, money behaves differently. It stops feeling like something you are always chasing. It starts becoming something you direct. It stops being only labor. It starts becoming leverage. It stops being proof of how this month went. It starts becoming evidence that the system is functioning. That is the reward. So if I had to start again from zero and rebuild to the first 100,000, I would do a few things relentlessly. I would kill high-interest debt. I would get honest about spending. I would build the skill of earning more. I would automate savings and investing. I would build a moat. I would invest simply. I would keep fees low. I would avoid fashionable stupidity. I would let boring consistency do what dramatic effort rarely can. Do that long enough, and the first 100,000 stops looking mythical. It begins to look inevitable, not magical, not glamorous, inevitable. And once you cross that line, the machine finally starts helping you climb. That is when people begin to understand that the first 100,000 was never the finish line. It was simply the first time capital became real enough to start changing the future with you. instead of waiting for you to do all the work alone.